Welcome back, and thank you so much for staying with us. This is Daybreak. In case you're just joining us, we are starting our conversation this particular morning as we look at the state of education, and I'm having this conversation with a panel of three already in studio with us this morning. From my far right, I'm hosting Mheshimiwa Nabii Nabwera. He's the Member of Parliament Lugari constituency, also sits at the National Assembly's Education Committee. Asante Mheshimiwa for creating time. And of course we have with us Michael Njuguna. Michael is a CBC expert. He heads the CBC Interpretation, Actualization and Innovations at Gravity CBC Resource Center. And of course we also have with us Professor Washington Okeyo, the Vice Chancellor of Management University. Asante gentlemen for creating time. And of course we just want to assess, how education sector looks this particular morning. And a lot has been happening, shaping the conversation. Among the key issues is the university funding model. Before I engage my panelists on this very important discussion, I want us to look at what the students have been lamenting over this funding model. We began the year on a very uncertain note. There was calls before the year ended last year that this funding model should be reviewed. But then again, when the students in universities, joined the school in 2025, there was still a lot of uncertainty, and some of them had, complaints about how the government has gone about this particular plan. Let's just listen into some of their cries, and of course we can be able to weigh in on how this has been implemented so far.
Tumefungua shule. Tulikuwa tunafikiria serikali ingefanya marekebisho na funding model, lakini tungali tuna majuto kuwa hakuna marekebisho yoyote yamefanyikana.
Serikali inastahili iangalie sana juu napata wanafunzi wengi wamepita mitihani, wamepata grade kama B+. Mwanafunzi anataka kufanya nursing, lakini ukiangalia fee yenye analipa nursing iko almost 200,000. Huyo mwanafunzi hatapata morali ya kwenda kufanya hiyo nursing.
Wafanye new funding model, watoe hizo mambo na band, alafu kila mtu ikwe equal, at least kila mwanafunzi akipata equal amount of money itakuwa sawa. Juu wengine tunatoka from low backgrounds, so tunapata pesa kidogo. Unapata hiyo pesa kidogo, unapata tena inafaa ulipe fee.
All right, so those are just, students from across the country commenting about their experiences with the new university funding model. And I have a panel here that will help me dissect this particular matter. Of course, we know that there's been quite a number of developments. It has been challenged, and of course, right now, it is not being implemented as we wait for the direction of the court on this particular matter. But Mheshimiwa Nabii Nabwera, you sit at a committee that, I believe must have interacted with some of the concerns that have even been raised with the students and even stakeholders in the education sector. When you hear, the twists and turns of the university funding model, Mheshimiwa, what would you say have been your biggest concerns, first as a Kenyan and as a member of the Education Committee at the National Assembly?
I think, first of all, I want to wish every member, followers of Daybreak, citizen of this country, Happy New Year.
Still goes on, eh?
Yes.
You haven't been on board this year.
Yes. I've been on this television before, not once, not twice, and various other media houses. And I did pronounce myself very clearly that there are cross-cutting issues that we thought the committee, the task force that was set up by the president, would really resolve. And unfortunately, up to today, I'm yet to see the outcome of that task force, and I'm waiting. I think we're resuming next week, and it will be one of my major issues on the floor of the House, because I want to call for that report. The issues are very basic. Number one is that the means testing tool is not interactive. Basic. That is the whole issue here. it operates in a silo, in isolation. Number two, that the input, the data input they are relying on to process the outcome is basically faulty. The Kenya National Bureau of Statistics does not have an updated data. I'll give you an example. I have two students basically in the same environment, basically the same family background. There's a road that divides a ward, Lugari ward, in my constituency. One was banded in band 1, another one was in band 5. That tells you
Same
that the economic indices, when I looked at the questions, how they answered, they were very accurate. But that tells you the economic indices they had, because one is called Panpepa Township and another one is called Kewa. But it's actually the same environment. Tells me that the data they relied on, Kenya Bureau of Statistics, has a problem. But by and large, the other problem that this tool, this funding model faced was inadequate sensitization process, including the students. Many of them faced with the cultural biases. They could not even give the accurate data. You know, in our community, it's not easy to say your father is, for example, a huts boy in somebody's farm, or that you completely have zero income. And equally, in some communities in this country, the young people do not know what their parents own, especially if they are not employed. How much
So in that case, Mheshimiwa, is that the failure of the family to declare like their realities, or is it a failure on the strategies that were employed by the funding model in getting their level of
Yes,
needs?
it is. For me, it is the funding model here. You must prepare the community. You must prepare your client. You must prepare the people who are going to be affected. Let me tell you, give me the law that requires, other than the one on the PIN, the law that requires me to declare to my children what I own. But you have to prepare these children to go and talk to the parents, say, look, I have this document here. We need to give information. And more interestingly, I'll tell you, many students, there is no network coverage in many parts of this country. And they do not have the tools. So they are relying on cyber. Now, this is what happened. I was investigating one case of a young man whose data, when I checked at the Higher Education Funding Board, it had completely different data from what the boy had given me. Then I realized they would go to a cyber. The cyberman would tell them, leave your information here. So 10 of them leave their data. You know, they are put on a paper. Nabina Boira, how many siblings? 10, acreage of land, 3, all those things. Then this fellow, either inadvertently or by design, because he's moving fast, it's easier to copy and paste. He filled information meant for someone else to this one. So how many of those have that kind
Errors,
of...
yeah.
And it is because, there's one, there are no facilities, and two, the network is not reliable. So they queue there from morning to evening. It is hazy. They are told, leave. When the network comes back, I'll help you deal with this. That's another issue. The last issue on this funding model is purely legal. And I think that is why we are in the quagmire we are in.
That we are currently.
Yeah.
Prof, I also want you to weigh in on this particular matter before I get to Njuguna. You, I would say, you're part of an institution that actually, you've had the privilege of seeing how higher education is funded, how students pay their fees, how the challenges that they go through, and the best way that you think this should be done. Do you think by coming up with a funding model only for us to freeze it, moments later and say, let's go back to the drawing board as we try and figure things out, did we jump before the gun, probably?
Yes. First of all, thank you very much, Seraphine, for welcoming me to the studio this morning. I appreciate on behalf of Management University of Africa and the private universities in Kenya and the entire university fraternity to be here today, basically to shed light on some of the aspects of funding in the education sector, in particular the universities. Back to your question on the new funding model. I think new funding model cannot be discussed in isolation. We really need to look at where we came from to get to the new funding model. Yeah. And that is the reason why a lot of people kind of say that the new funding model is not working, the new funding model has got problems, and so on and so forth, because they were used to a very stable system. That was called the differentiated unit cost system.
The DVC.
The DUC. The DUC system basically was awarding students support, financial support by HELB, or rather through HELB, depending on the course that the student was taking. And it didn't look at the background of the student, it didn't look at anything else about the student, just looked at what course is the student taking. If the student is taking medicine, then you would be given a certain percentage towards that particular course. And all students who would be doing medicine, therefore, would be getting the same amount of money regardless of their background. And depending on the course which another student was taking, if a student was taking, commerce, for example, then they would be kind of funded, less than the student who is taking. So it was based on the program the student is taking, and there's a percentage that the government was paying, which started at 80% and then kept on coming down. So basically the problem with that system now was the government was not funding it enough the way it was supposed to be funded. As I said, it started at 80%, then it reduced to less than 80% progressively. Right now, for example, in private universities, the government is only funding the ongoing students to the tune of 4%. Down from 80%.
So even the DUC was not fully
It wasn't fully as, as glamorous as people would say it is, because the government just could not afford the entire cost of education at that time. That was the problem with DUC. And that is why the government had to look at how can they come up with another model which would be less expensive to the government. And hence the birth of, the new funding model. The new funding model, the intentions are very good, I must say. And I echo the sentiments of my fellow panelist, Nabwera, that the new funding model has had its share of problems. And when you talk about the means testing instrument, for example, means testing instrument did not start with the new funding model. It is a formula that has been used in this country for over 30, 40 years. Since HELB was, became a body, an agency of the government to disburse funding to students. So it has been in use all along. Maybe the challenge that is now coming up is because, and it has been used not only in the education sector, it has been used in also other sectors, to determine, what is supposed to be paid by various individuals for services for the government. So when you talk about the the problem with MTI, okay, if I may say, is that now it has been applied in a more larger scale. And we have tasked the students to key in their own information and information about their parents. Now, the disconnect sometimes comes in because when the student is keying in the information about their parents, then some parents may not even want to be there. The student goes to the parent and he tells the parent, Daddy, I'm required to do this. Tell me how many acres of land you have, what are you doing, what are your levels of earnings, and so on and so forth. And then the dad may not even take it seriously. What the dad should do, or the parent should do, is to go and sit down with the student. Let us fill this form together. Okay? So
the burden should not be left on the students alone.
Exactly. Yeah. The burden should not be left on the student alone, because the student doesn't have much information about, the earning status, about the property status, and all the other factors that are required in that form. And that leads to inaccuracy. Okay? Now, the second thing is the data input that Nabwera talked about. Data input is problematic everywhere. So it doesn't matter how accurately you enter the data, there must be a validation process.
All right.
If that is not taken through validation process, obviously, like we say in the computer language, it will be garbage in, garbage out.
All right. We've been joined by Dr. Emmanuel Manyasa. Thank you so much for creating time. He's the Executive Director of Sawa Agenda. We had just started scratching the surface, and I'll come to you shortly before we go on break. But very quick comments from also Michael Njuguna on this issue of the university funding model. The key issue that is coming out here is the level of need of the learner. You've been a teacher for quite a number of years, and maybe you can weigh in also on telling us the correlation between the level of need and the access to education in terms of affordability for every learner, and probably what has been your biggest concerns as well with how the government has approached this issue of solving the level of need for the learners.
Allow me first to thank you for giving us this opportunity as an institution. My name is Michael Njuguna from Gravity CBC Centers, Director of Studies. My questions when you come to the issue of the funding model, I'm asking myself a question. We have had 3 funding models from the initial, whereby there was a fixed amount that was allocated from students back then, before you had the DUC, the differentiated unit cost model, or the what can we call it, or we are calling it the departmental funding model. Then we have the new model that the government is adopting. Why are we adopting the new? Why are we moving to the new model? Are we looking for solution that are challenges to the DUC model, or are we moving to a new model? What is exactly are we looking for?
Because the motive behind.
The motive behind this. Because I believe one of the big issues that we are looking here, we are looking about the issue of equity and the issue of sustainability. Does the new model really solve these issues? What can we do with the former model? Do we want to, from where we stand, is the former model, is it as that bad that we need to do away with it completely and adopt the new model?
Right.
And how comes the students, they are going back, they are saying that they are preferring the old model as preferred to the government projected new model? Why are they saying that we retain, most of the students are saying that we retain the old model? What are the parameters?
All right, pertinent questions there. What are the gaps? Dr. Emmanuel Manyasa, as you take us to a break, maybe you can also weigh in on, this introductory part of the conversation that's just telling us your biggest concerns. And maybe, he has raised quite a number of questions. What was the motive behind even moving from DUC to the new funding model? What are we trying to look at?
Thank you. Allow me not to talk about the funding model because I'm in the task force, and the report is going to have to be presented to the appointing authority before it can be discussed.
When you are given several months, they have you actually populate this country down. And students are not at they are at home.
Mheshimiwa, let us heshimu each other, because MPs have let this country down. Today, as we speak, schools don't have capitation. It is your responsibility to make sure they have.
All schools have capitation.
Back to my question on the funding. We'll talk about all those issues.
Yeah. So we are here today, and I want to speak as someone who has taught in a university for 11 years. Mm-hmm. And so universities come to where they are. Yeah. As far back as 2017, before this model was ever thought of, the Auditor General said 11 universities were technically insolvent. In 2017, 11 of our universities were technically insolvent. And that included the University of Nairobi, Jomo Kenyatta, KU, and included 3 colleges at that time, which for reasons I do not understand, were still made full universities when they were already technically insolvent as colleges. So for me, I came here to discuss the broader issues affecting higher education. The broader issues affecting higher education, one is how we have run the universities.
Which funding is among them, Dr. Manya?
Yes, funding is among them. How did we get here? When there was the SSP boom, and universities were making plenty of money, government asked universities to declare the amount of money they were making from SSP so that that could be factored into the capitation. They refused. So government decided to estimate how much they were making and cut capitation based on how much can universities fill in using the money they were making from SSP. What did they do with the money they were making from SSP? They splashed it around and opened campuses everywhere. I remember telling my then boss, the dean, he's still in the university now, he has risen in the ranks. I told him if I had money right now in 2010, I'll start saving to buy all these campuses we are opening in 10, 15 years at a throwaway price. I remember telling him that I believed, and if he's watching, he can confirm, that I believed either the people who are running universities were stupid or they were selfish, or both. Mm-hmm. Stupid if they didn't understand that that boom was going to be short-lived, because demand for higher education, like demand for any commodity, has booms and recessions. Selfish if they knew that they were only trying to make themselves look successful and preparing their successors for failure. As it has turned out, that is what happened. The university I was working for had over 13 campuses. They have closed almost all of them, and they have lost money in each one of them. So we are here because of mismanagement, partly. And secondly, because we had challenges to fund. So there are challenges to fund. But there's also a question of where did the funds that were available go? All right. And we need to confront those issues.
All right.
If we want to
just 2 issues, right?
we need
just 2 issues. We need to get these things.
Why don't you hold that thought for me,
into perspective?
Why don't you hold that thought for me? Let me.
It will take me 1 minute.
Let me pay some bills, and then we come back. Allow us to just take a very short break. We'll come back and put this whole issue into perspective. Please, Mheshimiwa, just hold that for me. We are coming back in just a bit.